All right, hello students. This is my second GEMS video for week one, and this one's going to talk to you a little bit about how to do the discussions and how to do a great job with the discussions. Discussions are a pretty important part of the of your work because you're going to be using those discussions to help each other, and so you'll want to make sure you do a great job with those discussions. So let me go ahead and minimize that, and let's take a look at discussion 1. So discussion 1.1, again, is in that same module 1. You go use the button here to go over until you get to the one that says, the one that looks like this. And just remember that you're reading through this. You're going to take a look at what it's about. You want to make sure that you're doing two things, remember. So by Thursday nights, you must create an initial post. This is every week that you have a discussion. The discussions are always due. The initial discussion post is always due by Thursday night. Excuse me. And then and they're always going to have these things that they want you to do. And I want you to be aware that the more substantial your answers, the better chance you're going to have of getting a great grade on them. Just a few sentences is not going to cut it, right? Because you've got these things that they want you to do. You've got introduce yourself to the class in this first case, talk about what your major is, anything else you'd like to share about yourself, and then you're going to go to part 2, which is to how have you used research in the past, provide an example of some sort of research you've used. It doesn't mean necessarily actually bring out anything physically as an example, but just discuss, something that you've done in the way of research before, right? It could be academic or non-academic. So it could be research you've done in your personal life, maybe like to buy a car or whatever, or it could be actual academic research, whichever. You're going to answer then, as you answer those things, you're going to respond to this. You're going to respond to these different bullets, right? What was the purpose of the research? For example, were you trying to learn more, convince yourself of something, or convince somebody else to make a decision or think something or do something? Who was your audience? Remember, the audience could be yourself, but it could also and should also be other people, right? So it's good to consider. For this one, it's really good if you're able to consider other people as your audience. But even if it's you buying your own car and it's just you as the audience, that's okay too. What specific steps did you take to complete the research? You want to actually try to break it down into a process, into the steps that you did to do that research. At least 3 steps, it says, right? And then finally, what parts of your process worked well? And did you have any trouble finding anything that you needed in the way of information? And finally, if so, what was the problems you had, or what did you have in the way of a negative encounter? Obviously, you can imagine this is definitely not going to be done in 5 sentences, right? So I always tell my students it's great to actually write these down. Not the entire thing, but maybe write down as part of your, in other words, use these as sort of a template. And in your actual response, write down, my introduction for the first part, my major, right? And whatever else you want to talk about. Then for here, you could say, you could write down how I've used research in the past. This is, and then write down what it is, an example, and maybe write down each one of these: purpose of the research, audience, steps, and then what worked well and what didn't, right? You can feel free to put down the prompts in your actual assignment. That way you can make sure you've got them all in there, and then you just put your answers in there too. Now, when you respond, you have to respond by Sunday nights, again on the weeks of discussions. By Sunday midnight, you've got to respond to at least 2 of your peers. You can respond to more than 2, but if you respond to less than 2, it's going to hurt the grade for that. So you got to respond to at least 2 people, 2 of your peers. And the steps, basically just 2 things you'll do. The first part will be what steps can you use in your own research process that your peers use. So you can kind of congratulate them and applaud what they've done in their way of their answer here. And then you can get right into, what's the step or 2 that they use that maybe you hadn't thought about and you could use. Or maybe it's one you use too and you just want to talk about how you can relate to it, right? That's kind of the first thing you'll want to do. And then, always remember to make sure you start with a little bit of accolades and, letting your audience know or letting your peer know, that you appreciate what they've written. And then you go into that, and then part 2, propose a different audience. So this is something you could this is something you need to add to it. You need to make sure you have it. Again, 4 or 5 sentences responses to your peer responses, again, is probably not going to cut it. I would say probably 2 or 3 sentences for number 1 here. And then this one here, you're going to propose a different audience. In other words, give an idea of another different audience that you think would be good for them to write to. That might take 1 or 2 sentences. How might your peers' approach to research change based on this new audience? That might take another sentence or 2. How might the purpose of research be different? What kind of information would your peer need to research to meet those needs? This could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 sentences, right? So you want to give good answers. The better your answers, the more thorough, the more thoughtful, the better chance you have of acing your discussions, okay? Remember, your contribution discussion plays an important part in building the classroom community. This is kind of the best way for you to actually feel a little bit like you're actually in the classroom, and that you get to talk to each other a little bit and communicate with each other. So don't be afraid to do that. Talk back and forth. You can leave a message, and then when somebody comes in and responds to it, go in and respond to that and tell them, thank you for these ideas. I'll definitely use blah, blah, blah. Don't be afraid to make it a conversation, right? So that's always a great thing to do too. All right. So I'm going to keep this one short and sweet. That's all. Just telling a little bit about how to make a great discussion. And that will be it. As always, let me know if you have questions or need any help.